Hi everyone and welcome back to Trapped by Love. And hello 2022, we made it. Maybe I shouldn't speak too soon. Whatever. Happy New Year. If you're interested in true crime and justice, please consider hitting that subscribe button because we'd love to have you join us. If you're new here, my name is Emma Carrington. By way of disclaimer, we discuss cases of domestic abuse and domestic homicide on this channel. So if that's not the kind of content you were looking for, I completely understand. Thanks for stopping by. My aim in covering these cases is to honour the victims of these crimes and to get their stories out there in the hopes of warning others who may face similar situations. So in saying that, I mean absolutely no disrespect to any of the victims or their loved ones. The hope is that the more people who recognise the red flags and warning signs of abusive relationships, the less prevalent these cases will be in the future. Knowledge is power, and we need to know what to be on the lookout for so we can protect ourselves and each other. So let's go ahead and get into this week's case. Today's case is that of Nancy Cooper. Nancy Lynn Rentz was born in Alberta in 1973 to Donna and Gary Rentz. She grew up in Edmonton with her twin sister, as well as a brother and a younger sister. Nancy was sporty and fun-loving. She grew into a beautiful woman who people gravitated towards. She had a love of jewellery, art and fashion, and she ran her own clothing store in Calgary along with working for IBM. It was while working for IBM in 1999 that she met Bradley Cooper. No, not that Bradley Cooper. This was Bradley Graham Cooper, and he was a 26-year-old IT engineer. He was also not Nancy's type at all. He was, by all accounts, quiet and reserved. Nancy was usually attracted to people more like herself, outgoing and fun-loving, and the prominent Calgary businessman she was seriously involved with fit that bill. However, meeting Brad changed this completely. She felt that Brad could provide her the life she was looking for, a settled and steady life. She was ready to have children and had been hurt in love before. So when trying to decide between the two men, she told her sister that Brad felt safer. Brad bought Nancy a beautiful diamond ring for their engagement, and they planned a big wedding. But when Brad was offered a job in North Carolina with the Cisco phone company, they decided to marry straight away so that Nancy could go with him when he relocated. So on a Friday night in October of 2000, the two married in a small ceremony with only Nancy's family, Brad's brother and a few friends in attendance. The newlyweds packed up and moved from their Canadian home to Cary in North Carolina. However, despite all outward appearances, the relationship soon began to deteriorate. And in this seemingly perfect neighbourhood where neighbours regularly gathered for barbecues and cookouts, the Cooper marriage was fraying. In 2002, when home in Calgary, Nancy told her family that she didn't want to return to North Carolina, and it took Brad coming up to beg her to come back with him for her to return. But Nancy, not having a visa to work in the United States, was bored and isolated. She had gone from a self-sufficient working woman with her own business to a housewife without friends or family nearby. Nancy started feeling a bit better about things when she was able to take on some work as a nanny. This gave her a bit of freedom and also the opportunity to connect with people. In 2004, the couple's first daughter, Bella, was born, followed by Katie, born in 2006. By 2008, Nancy and Brad had been in North Carolina for 7 years, and during this time, Brad's control over the couple's finances became more and more rigid. He'd put Nancy on an allowance. Okay, people say this wasn't a big deal because the allowance was $300 a week. They say this is plenty for groceries and for her to have some spending money. Please. I know people have referred to this suburb, Cary, as Pleasantville, but we're not in the 1950s. It doesn't matter how much it is. If one person is exerting control over the finances in a supposed equal relationship, that's a problem. And then there was the extra layer that will expose this for the financial abuse that it is. When Nancy took a job painting a friend's house, a friend who paid her in cash so she could have a little extra, Brad deducted what she'd earned from her allowance, so she couldn't make any extra money for herself. So in case there is any doubt, this is a red flag. It also came out that he never applied for her work visa, keeping her completely dependent on him. So yeah, all around financial abuse. He also would only put a minimal amount of fuel in her car so she couldn't go too far. Apart from the financial abuse, he also took at least one of the girls' passports, so Nancy couldn't leave without having to leave the child behind. He also monitored her emails, texts, and phone calls. This guy was the epitome of the controlling husband. Yep, red flags flying over this entire relationship. This neighbourhood was also a hotbed of bed swapping, if the rumours can be believed, and Nancy found out that Brad had been sleeping with her best friend, obviously former best friend now, and at first he denied it. And then after about a year, he finally came clean and said, yes, it had happened, but it only happened one time. And it meant nothing. You know how that song goes. But when they started attending counselling, the truth came out. It had been a full-fledged affair. In early July of 2008, Nancy and the girls went on a holiday with her family, and they noticed a marked change in her. She wasn't the same. Her parents knew something was very wrong, and that they had to help her get out of the relationship. They hired an attorney for her and were trying to work out how Nancy could break free of Brad and keep custody of the children. At the airport, Nancy sobbed and told her parents that she just wanted to go home. Nancy's mum, Donna, made the decision to go to Carrie to help her daughter after her return home. However, she never got the chance. On the evening of July 11, 2008, all the neighbourhood couples had come together for one of their regular gatherings, and they were all out eating and mingling while their children played on this warm summer evening. That included Brad and Nancy and their two little girls. None of Nancy's friends realised that this would be the last time that they'd see her alive. Witnesses at the gathering state that Nancy and Brad had been arguing before Brad and the girls left the party, while Nancy stayed on. The following morning, being Saturday, July 12, 2008, Nancy had plans to meet with her good friend Hannah. Nancy was supposed to be at her house at 8, but hadn't shown up. Hannah had contacted Brad, who said that his wife had gone jogging with another friend, but he was vague on the details, and it concerned Hannah because it wasn't like Nancy to miss plans. Hannah was worried knowing that the couple had been navigating this separation and how controlling Brad was. Nancy had been told by her attorney that she needed to stay in the house or she risked losing custody of her children. Seeing as she was only allowed in the country because of Brad and she didn't have anywhere to go or any way to provide for her children, he'd made sure of that. He would be the obvious choice for custody. And Nancy had been planning on taking the children back to Canada once the divorce was finalised, back to where she had a support system and the ability to make a living, which Brad was amenable to. That was until he got the breakdown of child support, alimony and private school fees. He was all of a sudden concerned that he wouldn't get to see the girls as often as he wanted to. Yeah, dude, that was the problem. I'm sure you can even hear my eyes rolling at that crock of shit. This guy was all about the money. Anyway, back to Saturday afternoon. Brad had told Hannah that Nancy left at around 7 to go running. When he spoke to her at 9, he then called her back in the early afternoon to let her know that Nancy was still not home. When Hannah found out that Nancy had also stood up another friend, they started calling around to local hospitals and they called Nancy's twin sister in Canada. They left a message asking her if she'd heard from Nancy and for her to call them back. Krista, Nancy's sister, called their brother Jeff, who was a police officer in Alberta. Jeff's first thought was that Nancy just needed some time out and she'd turn up. Nancy's mum and dad were at a funeral when they heard from Krista, and she told them that Nancy was missing, and they were immediately gripped by fear. They had seen her only a week prior and knew that things were bad at home for her. Nancy's dad, Gary, said to Donna that, quote, "This story isn't going to have a happy ending." Now, that may sound fatalistic or overly dramatic, but you have to understand that her parents were privy to just how bad things had gotten between the couple, and they could see the trajectory that the relationship was on. Her dad had even asked her if she was in fear for her life. And at the time, she'd said no, but I think Nancy, like most of us, had never thought that a relationship without physical abuse can be deadly. but statistics show that coercive control is a massive precursor to intimate partner violence. And in more cases than you'd believe, the first act of violence in these relationships is murder. But I digress. Nancy's parents obviously had feared for her well-being. That's why they'd arranged for the lawyer, and the reason Donna was planning to head out there to be with her daughter through the upcoming formal separation. So at this time, Nancy's friend Jessica Adam, whose house that she was supposed to paint that morning, not her husband, called 911 to report Nancy missing. She also told the operator that Nancy and Brad were in the midst of a nasty divorce, but they were still living together, and that she was worried. After her friend's calls, Nancy's family raced to Carrie to join the search for her. And once the police were involved, Brad made a televised plea for information. People came out in droves to search for Nancy. They searched alongside her family, tracing all the trails where she was known to run, but found nothing. That was until 2 days later. A man walking his dog in a new subdivision that was still under construction saw a woman's body in a drainage ditch. When this man called 911, he was asked if the woman needed medical assistance, and he told the operator that she looked like she was dead. The autopsy confirmed that this was indeed Nancy Cooper. It showed that she'd been strangled. She'd been found wearing only a sports bra and her diamond stud earrings. Despite the lack of clothing, there were no obvious signs of sexual assault, and the fact that she was still wearing these earrings gave a fairly good indication that the motive for her death was not robbery. So what happened? Her body had no other signs of trauma, no defensive wounds or signs of a struggle or a beating, just the broken hyoid bone, indicating strangulation. Detective George Daniels was the man tasked with piecing this puzzle together, and he thought back on the discussion he'd had with Brad while they'd been searching for Nancy. Brad had told him that he and Nancy had been up from 4 a.m. trying to calm their crying 2-year-old Katie. Then at 6-ish, he'd made 2 trips to the grocery store. He said when he came back from the store, Nancy had gone off running. They also discussed why Brad hadn't been the one to contact Nancy's family, and that led to the couple's marital troubles. However, according to Detective Daniels, Brad had told him that things were getting better in the past 2 months. Nancy's friends and family, of course, were telling a very different story. Her parents told Detective Daniels about their trip in the weeks before her murder. They explained that Nancy was only still in the home with Brad because her attorney had told her that if she left, she ran the risk of losing everything, including custody of her daughters, being that she was not an American citizen and was only in the country on a spousal visa. Brad had all the control. She was essentially trapped. She had taken to keeping all important documents locked in her car. However, Brad had found the girls' passports in the car and taken them, ensuring that they couldn't leave. Nancy's friends explained that she slept in her daughter's room with her car keys at hand and the door locked. The day after Nancy's body was identified, Nancy's family went to court petitioning for temporary custody of the 2 children. They cited emotional abuse before Nancy had gone missing. They were concerned for the girls' safety. The judge determined that the intense scrutiny that Brad would be under would put the children at risk, and the girls were taken back to Canada to live with their mother's twin sister, Krista, even though at this time, Brad had not been charged with anything. So with all this information coming in, the police once again questioned Brad about what had happened in the hours leading up to Nancy's disappearance. He told them that he and the 2 children had left the neighbourhood party at around 8:30, and the children and himself were asleep shortly after. He said he was awoken briefly when he heard Nancy come in at around 12:30, and then again when Katie woke at 4 a.m. He then went through the series of events involving him going to the store not once but twice and receiving a phone call from Nancy on one of these runs to the shops. He then goes on to say that Katie had settled by the time he'd returned the second time around, so Nancy headed out for a run. That was the last time he saw her. 3 months after Nancy's body was found, in October of 2008, Brad was charged with first-degree murder. The trial started in March of 2011, 2.5 years after Nancy's murder. The prosecutors believed that Nancy had never gone for a run that Saturday morning back in 2008. In fact, they believed that Brad had waited for Nancy to return from their neighbour's party to continue the argument that had been in progress when Brad had left earlier. This is when he strangled her and put her body in the boot of the car to transport her to the drainage ditch. The defence pointed to the fact that there was no physical evidence to implicate Brad in this crime. However, there was something that did need to be addressed, and that was the alibi phone call from the house to Brad's mobile on his trip to the store. But remember what Brad's expertise was: internet phone technology. He was top of his field in 2008, one of only just over 100 people with his skill set. So if anyone knew how to orchestrate a phone alibi of this sort, he was the guy. An employee of Cisco, the company Brad used to work for, explained about 10 different ways a person with Brad's knowledge could have remotely made that call. There was also the fact that even though Brad had repeatedly said he'd never been near this new construction area, the police found evidence on his computer of Google Maps searches that trained in on that exact location. This search is logged in his computer at 1:15 of July 11, 2008. Yep, the afternoon before Nancy went missing. The computer also showed that Brad was up and online until after midnight on the Friday night, not in bed asleep as he had said. The defense claimed that Brad was not the guy they were looking for, so they basically decided to drag Nancy's name through the mud. They claimed that Brad was not the only one to have an affair, that Nancy had also been unfaithful, which, okay, maybe she had been, but why, if they were both so unhappy that they were stepping outside the marriage and they were both talking divorce, why not let her move out and move on and do the same? If he hadn't been so horrid and controlling, she may not have been so ready to flee. I have listened to so many podcasts that have tried to paint Nancy in an unflattering light. And yes, she may have had an affair as well, and they can talk all about how much debt she racked up. But they don't seem to discuss how Brad contributed to their financial distress. She could have been assisting in digging them out of the financial hole, but he blocked her ability to work legally and left her without a car for most of the time that she was in the States. Nancy wanted out, and Brad knew he had all the power because she couldn't take the girls with her and she couldn't provide for them in Raleigh. She was trapped, which is exactly how she felt. These I'll Paint a Full Picture podcasts are great, but this poor lady would never have wanted to escape her if it had not been stripping her of any and all autonomy. It seems that there are no both sides of the story accounts, and I'm sorry, but I'm not about to change that. Was Nancy a saint? Was she perfect? No, probably not. Who of us are? But neither was Brad. I think this man was controlling and manipulative, and he murdered his wife, and the jury agreed. They convicted him of first-degree murder after a trial that lasted 2 months. He was sentenced to life in prison. However, Brad's defense attorney appealed the verdict and he was granted a new trial 2 years after being sentenced. Instead of going back to trial, he pled guilty, and a big part of his plea deal was that Nancy's family would have custody of Bella and Katie. So essentially, he traded his children and the chance to clear his name before them and anyone else who cared for a lesser sentence. These are the same children who he said seeing every second weekend was not enough while the couple were separating. But now he will let them go for good. At the time of his conviction and appeal, there were so many who believed Brad had been railroaded, and there was even a book published on the subject along with free Brad t-shirts. And I don't subscribe to that line of thinking, obviously, but if you are interested in going down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole, I'll leave a link to it in the description box below. There are people who say he took a plea because there was no way he'd get a fair trial, but he was fairly granted a new trial, so I think that's a cop-out. And as a parent, even if I had to sit in prison for the rest of my days, I would never openly admit to killing their other parent and having them believe that if I hadn't done it. But maybe that's just me. So 12 years after Nancy's murder, Brad was released from prison in November of 2020 and deported back to Canada. Bella and Katie were adopted by Nancy's twin sister Krista and her husband, and have been living in Canada with all of Nancy's family close by. Donna said that the family is focusing on raising money and awareness for Nancy's Butterfly Fund, which is dedicated to helping women and children dealing with domestic violence. She said, we are working very hard to help increase awareness so people know where to go and how to get help. It seems, though, that the fund's last event was in 2012, at least from what I can find. So if you are looking for somewhere to donate, I'll link a couple of other very similar foundations for you to check out and support below. But that's all I have for you this week. I'd love to hear your take on this case. Did he do it? Did he not do it? Did the police just decide on Brad and take him down? I know I have very strong opinions, but I would love to hear your thoughts. So if you if you want to tell me what you think about this one, it convinced me that he got a raw deal. Like I said, don't think so. I think the fact that she was leaving was not sitting well with him, and he took matters into his own hands. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop a comment below. Definitely love to hear your take on this case. If the content of this case has raised any concerns for you regarding your own relationship or that of a loved one, please reach out for help. There is a list of resources listed in the show notes and the description box below. If you enjoy true crime, please consider subscribing or checking out another episode. The reason I'm here is because I believe this is a really important topic that needs more exposure so we can all stay safe from abusive relationships. I thank you for joining me this week, and until next time, please take care of yourselves and be kind to one another.